Good afternoon, everybody. Question in the forums regarding how do you change the size of the particles. We had discussed using the waterfall effect for some splash on a boat, and I'm very quickly going to show some of the different values within that waterfall that you can use to change the size and the visual look of it. Quickly adding in the waterfall, grabbing it low. Let's see, where's that waterfall? Let's make it visible. Okay. There we go. I see. It's a little bit smaller than the boat. Bring it out here. Lower it to the surface of the water, as we did in the last video. Okay. And get it right there. Alright, that should be good. Let's see what that looks like. There, you get a little bit of splash happening on the bow of the boat. In this case, maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger. Let me see what happens if I raise it up just a little bit. Well, back down. Okay, so we go into the modify on the waterfall and we scroll down. Modify is here. We scroll down until we see our particle settings. The first section of the particle settings will change the actual images which are being generated via the particle. You have a life cycle of the particle, and under the particle key you can think of this line as that life cycle. Starting at 0, and in this case, because the minimum and the maximum are both 150, each one of those particles will last for 150 frames. So here we're at 0, and here we are at 150. If you had a particle which had more random elements, like say bubbles, where you wanted some bubbles to pop or disappear at the 30 frames mark and some of those bubbles to pop at the 150 frames, then I would change this to 30, right? So my minimum would be 30, my max would be 150, and somewhere in between those bubbles would be going and disappearing. Now, as I said, think of this as the life cycle of the particle, and there are four points on that life cycle where you can adjust some of these values. And so for the waterfall, it's emitting a bunch of these pictures, these right here, the diffuse image. It's emitting these, and along the life cycle, each one of those images is changing. So at the very beginning, you can adjust the color, the opacity, and the size for each one of these 4 points. At the very beginning, it's white, which means it will be the exact same color as it's shown in the image. The opacity is 0, it's 100, the size of the image is 100, and the width is 10. At the second point, again, it's white, the opacity, now you can see it, it's 87% see-through. Your width increased and your height, so it got a little bigger. At the third point on the timeline, it's increased in size. And then at the fourth point, your opacity is back down to 0, and your width is 150 and 450. So the size of the individual images being emitted have changed along this cycle. Now, we don't see a lot of it because it's happening under the water, right? So we're only really seeing the beginning of this particle. So the very end, you're seeing these down here. So if I were to click on that last one, we see it's 150 and 450. Those images are down at the bottom of the waterfall because that's the point they are in the life cycle. Okay, so it is possible we could change those individual particle sizes and colors and opacity. The other place that you want to concentrate on for size is going to be in the emitter settings. You have a quota which says how many of those images should be on the screen at any given time. Here we are at 3,000. And then your emit rate, they're pushing out 70 of those images per second. Then we have the volume, which is currently at 150, the 2 and 2. That's essentially the size of this little green box here. If I change those settings, if I change this to 700, you'll see it becomes much longer, 700 wide. And so therefore, if I were to click this, it's going to be pushing out the exact same number of images, except now it's spreading them out across a much longer area, okay? And maybe that's something you want to do. You can use that to adjust it. The other two are not going to be as helpful here because it's essentially that's where they're coming from. So for instance, if I change this to 200 and 200, Now they're all going to be coming out of this entire box. So let's see what that looks like. See, so now they're being emitted from the box, and maybe that's helpful. Okay. So changes to your emit rate. Change it from 70 to 20. We get a little less. If we change it to 200, we get a lot more. You can increase the robustness of that splash. If we change the quota, then you can start to see some cycles inside here. So if I change this to 200, it's pushing out 200 and stops. They're gone. It pushes out another 200 and stops until they disappear from the screen, which actually is down here. So this is a way to set up cycles, but leaving it as the original is probably what you want to do. But yeah, so using the emitter settings, the quota and emit rate, the emit volume, which is where they're coming out of, and then also making changes to the particles themselves along the life cycle at these 4 points are the 3 ways that you can concentrate on changing the size of a particle. Okay? You can also find a lot of information about it in the Iclone manual, which I linked in the thread which we were discussing. Okay, cool. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful. Post any questions in the thread.